Hello, I'm Dr. Daria Brzezinski, and this is What Wize Women Want, here on Charlottesville's Public Access Comcast Channel 13. Every week, we bring you panels of women to discuss topics that hopefully will keep you informed. Ladies, we are 52% of the population, with 85% of the purchasing power. Let's use that power to make the kinds of choices that it will help ourselves, our families, our children, and our community. You can find our topics on our website, www.whatwizewomenwant.com. You'll also see the panelists that we have here each week. Each woman on our panel has her own page so that you might find out more information and or contact her. You can also contact us or ask us questions for future programs, and we'll be happy to use them on the air. This week, we're going to be talking about maintaining and sustaining healthy marriages. We have both a psychologist and 3 women who have been married, well, all 4 women actually, have been married quite a long time. So they have a little bit of knowledge and expertise on sustaining a marriage. To my right is Mary Cunningham. She happens to also be student advisor for GRASP, the Great Aspirations Scholarship Program. To her right is Roberta Cook, a swimming instructor for Charlottesville Parks and Recreation Department. To her right is Lesley Foster, owner of Ink and Inquiry. And to her right is Phyllis Koch-Sheras, clinical psychologist, and at couplepower.com. Now, consecutively, they are Mary is married 27 years, Roberta is married 46 years, Lesley is married 23 years, and Phyllis is married 37 years. So I think we have enough expertise here in terms of sustaining a long-term relationship experientially, besides for our professional on board here. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is there a magic formula for sustaining and maintaining healthy marriages? Phyllis, would you like to start? Is there some sort of magic about it?
Well, I don't know that it's magic, but it is important. And what my husband and I say, and we've written about and studied, is that what seems to be the key is being an entity about your relationship, having the couple be the entity that you live through and that you work with and you work towards, so that rather than just thinking about what you need for yourself individually, you think about and work towards what the couple is and what the couple needs and what the couple wants. And once you have that framework, that paradigm of the couple as an entity, in a way it is a magic formula. Okay. Everything works from there. So it's a place to come from, not necessarily a place to get to, but a place that once you're in it, everything seems to flow from that.
Lesley, what have you found that works for you?
Well, on a lighthearted note, I have to say that when I was, a few years ago, a friend of mine who was getting married for the first time in his 40s, we went to his reception and we were kidding him that the key to a successful marriage was 2 little words. Yes, dear. And we, it just was very comical, and we were pursing his lips together, yes, dear, yes, dear. And then later that week, I was living in Oregon at the time, the cover of the Oregonian had an article that supported just that people, couples that in which there's that dynamic where the husband learns to say yes, dear, statistically stay married longer. But I think what that really speaks to is kind of a perspective issue, that don't get all hung up on that little stuff about, the color of the couch or this or that. Some of this is women's domain, not always, but it really speaks to putting things in perspective. The little stuff is not where you need to focus your attention. The big picture is, who is this person? Are they a person of character and standing, integrity? Do you trust them? All these things. But I think, so I like the story about the yes, dear, and I pull that card often in my marriage.
Well, and I think it works both ways.
Yes, it does.
I find I use the yes, dear from my own perspective with my husband because of just what you said, that sometimes what's more important is what's good for the couple rather than what's good for me.
Yeah.
So yes, dear is a good formula for both of us.
Roberta?
And for us, it's commitment to each other. And the magical formula that you referred to in the question was what works for the both of you, the two of you.
Mary?
You said the big picture, so that's definitely a magic formula. Just keeping in mind what's the big picture here, what are we committed to? And that big picture can change. I'm not saying it stays the same from year to year over, 20 plus years, but agreeing on what it is and being committed to that.
I've heard couples say that, we live in an I-me culture. Me, I. And it's really difficult. I mean, I think there's a difference between younger couples today and, those of us people who have been married 20 years and more. It's been a different environment to be married into. And, I see a lot of confusion with younger couples. Well, all the media says I'm supposed to be first, and once I'm first, then everything else falls into place. So when you're talking about the marriage as an entity in and of itself, that kind of contradicts what the media is saying today. Do I have it right, or do I have it wrong?
Absolutely. We found we had to write a whole chapter in our book, Lifelong Love, about the obstacles to lifelong love. And one of the big ones is the media is really focused on individuals and individualism and celebrities as individuals. And seems like mostly if they talk about a marriage, it's because it's a divorce.
Right.
And then they're off to individual land again. So it's more about individualism than coupleism. There isn't even a word called coupleism. We just made it up.
Yeah. I think the art of any successful marriage is knowing the art of compromise. You just cannot always have it your way, and you can't. And I'm also a big proponent of not keeping score. Well, you do more of this and I do more of that, and when you get start to fall into that trap, it's a no-win proposition. So I think very much the idea of compromise, which is underpins of friendship or all kinds of relationships. You just can't. It's not all about me.
Yeah.
And I think the mature relationship is really, in a marriage, is really about looking to support your spouse to, kind of in a spiritual aspect of helping to propel them to become their most realized self. And I certainly recognize that my husband has done that for me from way back when, even when I was working in Washington and I had been with a trade association for several years, and this job opening came up for a senior position. He said, you should apply for that. And I said, well, I don't know, honey. This, that, and the other. I said, don't be ridiculous. And so he was the one that said, put your hat in the ring when I didn't yet see it in myself. And then I did get the job. But it's that idea of, really ultimately looking towards the betterment of your partner. And, when you become less selfish, less self-focused, that, I think, is also one of the underpinnings of a good marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you said, I think you said the depth of, the relationship having depth. The relationships you're describing in the media, those are very shallow relationships, talking about, Kanye West and all the celebrities and who married who and who divorced who. That's just entertainment, and it's not sustaining. It doesn't nurture anyone. It's just entertainment. So I don't think that I think people are waiting to get married longer because I think that it is viewed as something that's not frivolous, that it's a deep commitment. So that you have to consider what will be sustainable.
I thought people were waiting longer because people wanted to accumulate wealth and get, I thought statistically people wanted to get more wealth and material things and all that in order to
I hope that's not why they wait.
I don't think so.
I think they are being more careful and serious
I do.
about it.
I definitely do.
And to piggyback on what you were saying, I think, Daria, it's actually the opposite of the individual having to have it all together first. What you were saying shows how the couple can support the individual to be even more of who they are. And we have actually found, contrary to what many psychological theories say, that you have to have all your own stuff together before you can be in a relationship, that the relationship can actually support the individual to be more stable and more of who they are.
And it's a process. Mm-hmm. Everything we do is a process.
Well, you've been
especially
married
a
47
relationship.
years. I mean, that's
And it's still a
amazing.
process. But a happy one so far.
So-
I count on it being so.
So, for example, just as an example, I mean, keeping score, I mean, we'll get back to that one. But so when you and your husband argue or have a disagreement or whatever happens, since you've been married the longest here, do you go into a separate room to have your argument? Do you do it in front of the children so they can
The
see
children
people
are
arguing, or yeah? So
I guess it depends on what it is, if it's some little thing or a bigger thing that involves goals and
well, give us an example.
plans for the
give
long
us an
life.
example.
We don't tend to argue too much. We mostly discuss, hopefully.
Oh, that's good.
Sometimes my husband will just walk away and let it
That's an option.
simmer a little bit, which is hard, rather than dealing with it.
So when he walks away, you're left there to be,
Holding it.
holding
Yes,
it all
yes, to
together.
wonder what's going to happen next.
Yeah. So what does that feel like, for you when I think women are different in their responses to things than men are. And I've heard this typically over and over again, that men walk away while you're standing there just ready to, have it out.
Right.
So what do you do with that?
I can't have a conversation with myself, so I just have to wait, and sometimes it's discussed way too long after the fact. But eventually
And then you've
it's
forgotten
discussed.
it?
But there really is something to waiting sometimes. We say that there's 4 things in a relationship that really make it work, and it's actually the third one that's communication. Because if we start trying to communicate, sometimes it ends up into a hostile kind of interaction that can make things worse. So if you really are clear about your commitment and cooperating, then the communication can work. So I sometimes tell my clients, stop communicating because you're making it worse. And when you've learned how to communicate, then it can be productive. So sometimes what your husband does might actually be
Right.
Yeah.
a good productive way to work the process.
Even though it's frustrating to you.
Yeah.
There are definite tools like that. Was one of the David and I have been doing this couples coaching couples since 2007, and it made a tremendous difference to our relationship. One of the things we were doing was having those kinds of arguments where I would just get so frustrated and I would, leave the room and just like, okay, I can't talk about this anymore. And we really had to work on communication to improve it. And we have this method right now that's working for us, I have to share, that's, it has a lot of different names, not iterations, but we're calling it T for 2. And it basically just means to sit down with your partner and listen without interruption. However long you can plan that, whether it's 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And I mean no body language, no facial expressions, no raising the eyebrows or exasperation, but just listening until you're done.
In a normal voice, right?
And then giving the other person 5 or 10 minutes to just, and you would be amazed at how helpful that can be. It can just reset your communication because you can just say, oh, I've been heard. Whatever it was I was mad about is kind of like
You don't understand.
melted away. All you need to, a lot of times is to just be heard. And so that's just one of the things that's really helped us a lot.
Yeah, piggybacking on that, I found that, through the years I'm a big reader, so I like to read up on things, including relationships. They take work. There's learning involved in how to be a good friend, a good parent, a good partner. And so one of the books I read years ago was the Mars Venus book.
Oh,
And
yes.
sometimes it's just one little takeaway from a book that stays
Oh,
with you. And in
yes,
this case, it was
absolutely.
it was about communication. And, sometimes I used to get annoyed with my husband. We'd sit down and I'd be talking about something and I could tell he was impatient, like, well, get to the point, sweetie. What's the point here? And he would sometimes say that and I would get so annoyed. And after reading that book, it says that a man wants to fix a problem, so he's on guard like this. Well, what's the problem here? How can I intervene and help you with it? And you just want to be heard. So now we take that. I'll sit down and say, honey, if you got a few minutes, I'd like to get your advice on something. Or I'll say, I just want to talk and unload, and so don't say anything.
Right.
And so it brings a sense of levity to it as well, but also sets a parameter. So he can relax and know I will just let her blather on, or she really wants me to help her here. So just that one takeaway really was effective because it had to do with the style of communication.
That was
So
very
that
true.
underpins
So
a relationship.
That was helpful.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the opposite. It's not just the women who are like that. I hope
Oh,
Peter
yes.
won't mind my saying that when he comes home from work, he really needs to unload. He really wants to just spill it all out. And it took me a while to not resent that, like, okay, when is he going to ask how my day was, And I realized that, he just really needs to be listened to and let that. He doesn't want me to fix anything or, judge anything. And once I've, done that, and it doesn't take him that long, he talks pretty fast. And then he'll think, oh, yeah, and that was your day. And we can then move on. But I think it's, just having that respect of knowing what each other's style is like and giving each other space for that.
That happens with us as well.
Yeah.
How many
okay.
different styles are there? No,
Well,
really. I
as
mean,
many
is
as
there
there
a
are
variety of styles?
We say,
As many
we've studied
people as
it, and
there-
in our book we say there's 3 personality types of couples. And
Which is what?
Well, one of them is the romanticized one, where they're like just totally into each other, and that usually actually only lasts about 18 months.
Right.
Oh, no.
Not romantic.
Oh, I know.
Romantic,
Not her husband.
Romanticized,
Not her
where
husband.
everything has to be just all about each other, or you get kind of like bummed out and depressed. And the research shows that romanticized part, after about 18 months, that starts to wane. And some couples, their personality is such that they have to have that.
Right.
And sometimes they end up in the therapist's office, sometimes they end up in somebody else's couch or bed.
So what's the second one?
And the second one is what we might sometimes call independent. Well, actually, that's the second or the third one. The independent one is where the people are really looking off in different directions and not really paying that much attention to the couple as an entity, but more into their individualistic kind of relationship. And it's the middle one, which is kind of the traditional relationship where...
What's that called?
Well, sometimes it's called traditional, where the one spouse is supporting the other. And traditional medical marriages often were that way.
Right.
And they may work fine, but sometimes it gets to where one person is really kind of resenting having to be the one that's always the supportive one. So there's those 3 personalities. And then we like to say that there's the possibility of this co-creating relationship, the dynamic relationship, where people are able to be flexible and be supportive of each other and create this couple as an entity.
Which appears to be the case with, many of you, especially, after 47 years of marriage. It seems like there's much more of a co-creating environment. It seems to me that young couples today really don't, this fast-paced, short-lived kind of society, consumer society, where everything is hurry up and, we can buy another one or go to the next one, and it's easy to get a divorce. And, it seems like couples don't take as much time. Do you think that has to do with age or our socioeconomics, or do you think that in your sphere of influence, do you see couples, because I'm sure you're all surrounded in couples, do you see younger couples able to sustain that and commit to learning about each other? I mean, I know you have 2 daughters who are married.
I think so, and partly is what they see in my husband and I compared to, their spouse's parents.
Which may not have been as healthy.
Which it may not have been as healthy, yeah.
Okay, so they have something to work from. So, Lesley, do you see it in younger couples?
I haven't really observed that. I don't have enough interaction with some of those younger couples. I mean, at this stage of my life, my daughters are teenagers, so we haven't gone into that. So I don't really know many very young couples and what the issues are that they struggle with. Although it does occur to me, you know, when I think about younger marriages today, I wonder, because they are ostensibly so egalitarian, and they're sort of more on their plate, I think they have more issues to sort of sort out what is the new definition of today's modern marriage.
Well, you all have not really, you are not the typical, let's say, traditional kinds of marriages, because, you know, you're all working women, you're all, you know, you have a much more equality, and yet, you know, older, so to speak, and in our era, not necessarily, you know, many women still stayed home and were mothers and didn't go out to work. So you ladies are, you know, for the most part, modern women. And you're right, there's so much more to balance in a marriage today. I mean, I just can't imagine just the Facebook and the social networking, and, you know, I walk in the local toy store and I just observe these mothers texting, and, you know, their kids are running all over the place, and they're trying to keep communication with whoever they're communicating with, and, you know, and I'm thinking, wow, we never had all of these distractions, you know, from our children. So what is it about, how do you keep that in control in your marriages? How do you know, with raising children especially, how do you keep that aspect in control?
Well, I mean, when we moved here in 1997 to Virginia, our son was 3, our daughter was 5, starting kindergarten. We chose not to have television in our home. I mean, we had videos, and, you know, that was when you could rent videos or whatever you did to watch television, but we didn't buy cable, and so we think it made a big difference. We think that our children didn't have a big influence. Now, you know, there's everything you can get on video and everything now. Now that the children are gone, I've put up a TV antenna, but now that they're in college. But I think that made a big difference. We all think that. We talk to our children now who are, you know, college age about that, and they think it made it. Now, you know, they'll say they felt a little odd of it with their friends because they didn't, when they make a remark or a joke about something that they saw on television, they wouldn't know what they were talking about. But
in the scheme of things, that's so unimportant.
They
Yeah,
survived,
exactly.
and I think that
Exactly.
they, at this age that they're at now, in their early 20s, they appreciate it.
Well, you have children in their 20s. How do you deal with, you know, the technology, the teens, I'm sorry. How do you deal with the technology and all of that?
Well, I don't know that we're the best example. I mean, you know, we have certainly not attempted to toe the line, and, you know, our children are far more sophisticated than we are with their technology use. And I think for my generation, our generation, it's a little bit disturbing. You think, oh, really? Yeah, isn't there? But you know, it's got a life of its own. I don't know. I think the jury is still out on the pros and cons of this new paradigm. I mean, when you think about communication, it's always been changing and evolving from the time it was just the oral tradition to then the written tradition. And, you know, communication is a living thing. So jury's out, but I do know that it was a little bit of a change in our relationship with Dennis and I and our children when they reached their later teens, when they decided that they didn't want to sit around on a Saturday night and watch a movie with us. They wanted to go up and do something, the two of them, you know, 2 daughters, 2 years apart, very close-knit, and they had their own plans about things that they wanted to do, which no longer included us.
Fair enough.
So
Which I think is a normal developmental
Yes, yes.
stage.
Absolutely, fair enough.
So do your children come first, or does your husband?
You know,
Everybody talks about this, and you know, with
I don't think-
women who have been married for so many years, is that a priority? Is that something you think about?
My husband comes first unless it would be an abusive situation.
But I mean,
That's how we think of it.
before your children, when your children were growing up, did your husband come first?
Yes.
Okay, so you all agree that your husband comes first?
Well, if you think about the couple as an entity,
Yeah.
then it's just a natural thing that the couple comes first. and the children are
Yeah,
a
we're
part,
all part of a family.
of the family. So I think it really helps if you think about the couple as an entity, and the children really want you to do that.
Yeah.
I always remember this one family I worked with, and they brought their daughter in who was an acting out adolescent, and they were going to stop doing their couples therapy. And she said, "No, don't do that. You need it. Please keep that going."
Right.
And so I think the couple does need to be a priority. And, we're responsible adults. We're going to still take care of the children, and they will certainly, I think, appreciate that and model that in their own relationships.
It depends very much on what you're referring to when you say the children come first. You mentioned an abusive situation. I mean, there are different circumstances where a
right.
child's needs to feed or take care of a child have to come first. But being part of the family, you're all part of working together, and so making sure that everyone's needs get met is the real emphasis.
Well, I think I was playing devil's advocate because the media tends, well, no, I'm trying to bring out things that come out in the media
Right.
all the time, that confuse people about relationships and marriages. And I think we want to talk about the realities of it.
Yeah, it's not that simple. It's
Exactly.
very complex.
Yeah.
If you're a
Exactly.
single mom, it's a whole different situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I'm noticing now our daughter just had a baby a week ago, and how their couple has taken on being the parents of this child, where the child comes first. So they've given us notice as we're getting ready to go out there that their child comes first, and we're there to support them dealing with their child. So their couple...
Not entertain you.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely.
So their couple as an entity is taking on having the child be first.
Right.
Right.
So if everything comes from the couple, then the children
Right.
will come first for them,
Yes.
but it doesn't mean that they will ignore each other.
Yeah, I think it's hard to make a blanket statement like that because it really isn't one or the other. I mean, when they're very young, they take a lot more of your time, your psychic energy. And when our children were born, we grew up on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., and then got married and moved 3,000 miles away and had 2 children. And thinking, what were we thinking? Nary a relative in sight. And our friends at that time didn't have children, so we didn't have the ability to really take a weekend away or do things like that. But I think when your children are really little and it's such an exciting time of life, even though, as a couple, our time for each other wasn't, suffered, if you will, a little bit, or, that the proportion changed. I don't think either of us felt that there was a sense of difficulty that went around that. I think it was a willingness to put them first. But I guess, as you say, I'd never thought of it in that context, that you're doing it as one. So it's not to the exclusion of your spouse.
Yeah, it depends
Well,
on age.
Exactly the age, and I see couples all the time coming to me and saying, their child is now 2 years old, and the husband is saying, so when am I going to get her attention again? Because the mother is so focused on the child at the early stages, and he's so used to having them be a couple, that these early stages of the child, it gets, it's really difficult, especially, if you're nursing and all the other kinds of things. Women tend to focus on the child and then forget about the husband. So, I'm glad you brought up the different ages, of the child.
But luckily, the husband is a lot more involved these days with the raising of the baby, even though it might be nursed. There's many other things to do in supporting
I think that's one of the
mom.
encouraging things about the younger generation, is that the fathers, the husbands are much more involved, although my husband was involved from the beginning. That the traditional family wasn't that way, perhaps, but I think more and more of the men are moving
In the
into
hospitals,
that.
getting the parents,
Yeah.
the moms,
From the very beginning, the
especially
bonding.
getting the dads more involved and allowed to be in the room and such, and coaching and all that.
You are watching What Wize Women Want here on Charlottesville's Public Access Comcast Channel 13. Today we're talking about maintaining and sustaining a healthy marriage. With us today, to my right, is Mary Cunningham, a student advisor for GRASP, Roberta Cook, a swimming instructor, or I should say, well, Mary's been married for 27 years. Roberta Cook, a swimming instructor at Charlottesville Park and Recreation, who's been married 46 years. Lesley Foster, owner of Ink and Inquiry, who's been married for 23 years. And Phyllis Koch-Sheras, clinical psychologist at couplepower.com, who's been married for 37 years. Phyllis, you said there were 4 things in a relationship: communication, commitment, cooperation, and you never said the 4th one.
Okay, and let me just make one adjustment,
Okay.
because they need to be in this order.
Okay.
Commitment first,
Okay.
Agree.
and then cooperation, which I might just make a little distinction from compromise. Cooperation goes a step beyond compromise. With compromise, we find somebody feels like they have to give something up. If you keep going till you cooperate to get something that satisfies both of you, then you're in a better position. And then the communication can really support that once you have commitment and cooperation. And then the last one, which really goes to what Mary was saying about couples coaching couples, is community. And we have found that the couples who relationship are sustained and have lifelong love all have some kind of couple community that they are connected with. And I'm encouraged to say too, with the young couples now, I see how they have a community of couples that they're a part of as well.
Yes.
And that really makes a big difference. And it's one of the reasons that Peter and I actually started Couples Coaching Couples over 20 years ago, seeing the need for that in our communities and for couples. We worked with a lot of couples in our therapy practice, and we found even if they had the first 3, if they didn't have some kind of supportive community, they might end up coming back, which is okay, but if they had enough of a communities to support them and be a part of, they might be able to sustain that on their own.
And that's probably harder to achieve.
The community?
What do you mean?
Well, I guess realizing for one thing that that's important, and then is it a community as they are a couple, or is it the community where the friends of the husband are not necessarily friends and with the couple situation?
Yeah, that's a good point. We call that network interference. when the individual has relationships that interfere with the couple, which happens, sometimes they're peers. If they're single and they're, seeing their friend going away off to be a couple, they may try to pull them away. Sometimes even with parents, in-laws. When there's been problems in a couple, sometimes they, rather than supporting the couple, they'll say, "Oh dear, coming back and live with us." That kind of interference does
Right.
not support the couple. But if you work towards having a community, and sometimes it's not ready-made, you got to go look for it. If you don't have it in your family, generational family, creating that in your peer network may or may not be available. So it's one of the reasons we started Couples Coaching Couples, so that we can have these
Right.
communities that people can join. But we've also had people, create things through their churches. And
Well, I was going to say,
Yeah.
didn't you find it when your children started coming?
Or their
you had
schools.
schools,
Yeah.
your churches, and those kinds of
Absolutely.
activities, and that's how you
You're
develop
friends with
That is
the parents of
Yeah, the
Right.
school group, very
Yeah.
much
the
so.
school group
Go
or the
through
soccer
that.
group, or
Yeah.
but really making it an intention to have that kind of support, because it really is difficult to do it by yourself. That's one of the reasons, and it's more fun.
I was going to say fun.
Yeah, I was going to say. So were most of your groups related to or associations with your children, or were they?
Yeah, I think it's all, again, age. I mean, start
Have
out
they
with
evolved?
mommy and me group when you have a little infant, and that is very mommy-child centered because
Right.
younger ones needing so much more. But then you have school groups, or I was a Girl Scout leader for 12 years, so that was big community, so it was.
Before we had children, we were living in a very rural area, and there wasn't anything to go to do. So my husband and I decided that we would invent a discussion group. And there were 5 couples, and we would go to one person's home at a time, and they would plan the menu. It would be potluck, but the home where we met, that couple would decide what the topic was for the evening.
Oh, great.
And that was
That's
so
great.
Wow.
fun.
Yeah.
Wow,
Hadn't
that's
thought
amazing.
about that in a while, but
Maybe another reason you're together 47
Yeah,
years.
exactly. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Wonderful.
Lesley, where have your groups been?
Well,
Is it
it's kind
social?
of evolved over time. When the children were little and we were living in Oregon, they were 4 and 6 when we moved back. And I think at that time, curiously, most of our friends didn't have kids, but we had a very dynamic social life, and friends would come over to the house, and they didn't have the constraints of their own children, so they were able to come over freely, and we would cook out and barbecue and have parties, and so our children grew up in a very vibrant adult community, and they were fussed over, and our friends were very
their
solicitous
toys
of
were
them.
played with by adults, right?
They didn't have to share. But that was a very dynamic time and gave us a lot of, since we couldn't go out as much, the fun came to us, and we had a fun kitchen, and my husband was always a big cook, and we'd cook out or we'd smoke salmon or something. But and then when we moved to Charlottesville, my eldest daughter had just started first grade, and it seemed that so many of the people whose kids were in first grade that year, they had all moved to Charlottesville too. So there was just this huge group that was very
Of newbies.
of newbies, and of course, when children are little, their parents are invited in to build birdhouses or gingerbread houses and all these kinds of activities. And so we had an instant group of friends, and over time that has kind of not dissipated. We still have those friendships, but you're not drawn into the same orbit all the time. So then there's the evolution of sort of seeking something else and that's new, which I think is important for oneself individually as well as couples. So it continues to evolve. And then we have a large family within a few hours drive of here, so we derive a lot of enjoyment and support from that as well, and large groups of cousins that all get together. And I think that's really an anchor, even though they're not in Charlottesville.
Yeah, a family
but
is
they're within a couple of hours.
Yeah. One of the, we've kind of skirted the subject of commitment, and one of the things I was wondering, is it commitment an innate thing, or are people, do you feel like, one of the things I was thinking about are the advantages to legalizing, being legally married and living together, which it seems a lot of young people are living together rather than getting married these days with the freedom of sexuality and all that. We won't even go there. But so what do you think, do you think there's advantages to being legally married over living together? And what does that have to do with, does it really have anything to do with commitment when you get legally bound?
I think it does. I think living together is stage one. It's step one. You're making the big step.
Commitment for the time. At the time.
You're
You
a
think
couple.
that's a commitment?
Well, it's a start.
Right.
You're kind of feeling things out. How's this going to go? You get a dog. It's all like one step, two step. Then when you're ready, that's the way I think I see things happening now.
But it seems like it's so much easier to walk away, when those problems start happening. If you're just living together and all of a sudden issues arise, it's so much easier to walk away than it is to stay and
the
work
research
things out.
actually shows that couples that live together actually are more likely to get divorced.
Right,
The ones that live together before they get married.
right.
And
And
may
is that for any
maybe-
period of time? And how?
Any period of time.
Any period of time.
Yeah,
Oh.
I thought that was interesting. But
That's
I'm
interesting.
always struck by how much the gay movement is like fighting for marriage when, like you say, those of us in marriages or the heterosexual marriages are finding it so easy to get divorced. They're saying, let us get married. So,
really.
they're kind of like reminding us that there's really something important and special about being able
It
to
definitely
have
is.
that kind
Definitely.
of commitment.
Well, especially as you get older, because legally you have the ability to be able to make decisions for your spouse, and the person that you're living with. Which I think is really important in the end stages of life. But it just seems to me that young people who we've made this so easy now, both the divorce aspect and living together aspect, that the idea of commitment these days is not necessarily first and foremost in everybody's mind when they start, being in relationship together. Am I wrong?
I don't think the young people go into the thought of moving in with someone as a
Lightly.
lightly. It's still a very big deal.
Well, in fact, many of them have children before they get married. And, you know, I was kind of surprised at that. You know, my daughter's in so many different weddings and bridesmaid and, you know, well, and sometimes the bridesmaids in her wedding were pregnant and they weren't married and they were getting married later. So it's kind of like there's more choices and people are more accepting of it now.
It's not as critical as which comes first.
Yeah.
But getting there and
Yeah,
and
and
the
so they were still
commitment.
committed when they had the baby, and they said, well, we'll get married later.
You have more at stake. Then you get older, you have a child, you know, marriage gives you that legal status as well, as far as your property and your entwining your lives. The more you build your
legally.
life, you know, the more you've built your life together, then you have that commitment. That's all part of it.
I think the idea of going through a ritual of marriage is very profound. I mean, whether you do that in a church setting or whatever, but, you know, the idea of, you know, I thee wed and having a ring there's something beyond, it has nothing to do with the legal contractual arrangement in my mind. It's just something very profound. And I remember, you know, picking out the rings and when we, you know, bought the wedding bands and what we were going to say on the inside of the wedding bands, always with you. I mean, it changes. To me, it has nothing to do with the legal construct of it.
What changes?
I think it's on a spiritual level. It's a making a vow that it's, and again, this is not within the content even of religion to me. It's something everlasting. I mean, it's, you know, and even, you know, what we chose to put in our rings, always with you, it's the idea that there is this eternal joining, or maybe that we'd been together before, who knows, but it's tying into that something very profound level of a relationship. And I lived with my husband for a year before we got married. His parents never knew that.
Now they do.
Do now.
And
Anyway.
and that was special, but I wanted something more. I mean, there was a little bit of a tension at that period in time, thinking, well, how long is this going to go on? And so when he did propose that, you know, I knew that I was wanting that, and it changed something for him too.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something, Mary.
No, I was just thinking about that. I mean, it's because you can. I've never lived with my husband, but this is my second marriage. I married my high school boyfriend, and we didn't live together. It was commitment, had to be married. You know, but it didn't last. It was a terrible decision, and I'm just saying that just because we could have lived together, we tried, and it didn't work out. So sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it can't work out, and there are reasons. Certainly wasn't an easy. What I learned in the process, all the complications beside, is that marriages don't just come apart like perforations. You know, they rip people, and it's very difficult. So it's nothing anyone takes lightly, to get married, to get divorced, to live together. These are all, you know, serious considerations.
Go ahead.
I'm curious to know from you, Phyllis, whether the research shows whether it makes any difference the age at which you get married. I thought I had read somewhere that if you're, say, bucking up later 20s, the little further, if you wait until you're a little bit more formed, that you have a greater success of staying together. Is that true or not?
Well, we don't have quite the longevity of the research yet, but there does seem to be a trend in that direction. That it may also be because, as you say, more marriages are occurring later, and then, you know, we look to see which ones of those last. So it's not definitive yet, but it does maybe seem to be going in that direction.
What's the current divorce rate?
Oh, it's still around 50%.
Is it?
So it's not going up. It's
and
been
that-
50%.
Right.
It fluctuates. So, and that's for first marriages? How about for second marriages?
It's about the same
It's
for that.
So if you've been married once, you have 50% chance of
Oh,
getting
I
a
see what
divorce
you're
if you've
saying
been
for the-
married
what's the-
twice.
I don't know. I don't know how that's divided. I think it's all lumped together. That you have a 50%.
Every shot
Right.
is
Yes.
Well, I had heard that
50%.
it was higher at the second time around. That
Well,
the divorce rate was higher. So, but I thought I'd leave that up to you.
I'm curious to know, too, whether it makes a difference how long, when my husband and I got married, we'd been dating for 3.5 years, and then we moved away, and then it was 4 years before we had our first child. So we had a lot of time as a couple, just us, and especially even moving out west, then it was just us. We knew nobody. We had no families for better or worse, and so we really created a unit.
An entity. Yeah.
But I'm wondering if, for a couple that just, sometimes I've heard that from people, they get married and then the baby comes right away and they don't have the benefit of that time. The
stressful.
roots don't go as, you don't have the benefit of that. Not that it's a recipe
Well, I
for
found
failure, but I'm
that
just
sometimes
curious.
they come into therapy after the kids are like gone, or at least more occupied in their own lives. And then they kind of look at each other and say, what have we got here and how do we do this?
Sure.
So then they sometimes come in for therapy then to figure it out. And even if they don't come for therapy, that's the time they'll figure it out. Because if they focused only on the kids, then finally they have that time to where you come to how are we going to be with each other and what are we for?
Yeah.
I'm curious, what does a marriage negotiation look like? You were talking about cooperation and compromise, and you've all been married a long time. But what does it really look? I mean, you talked about walking away. I don't think that's really, is that that doesn't look like compromise to me. What does compromising, just to let people know what that looks like, because sometimes, people have it in their mind that cooperation and compromise means that one person has to let the other one have their way, or what does that really look like in your marriage?
Well, the metaphor that I found that works the best is it looks like a team, working together like a team. So that, like you were saying, not everybody's going to be doing the same amount. We tried for a while. We had a job chart.
Oh my gosh.
It did not work. We even tried weighting the different chores that we had. It just didn't work. But if we cooperate to take on what our strengths are and give and take, then it seems to work. Like the first book that Peter and I wrote, it's amazing we made it through because, as an English major, I had a very different standard about how the things should be written. And finally I realized, well, let's cooperate here. He has his strengths, I have mine. I may be doing more of this. He does a heck of a lot more in something else. So we learn to cooperate as a team, like a basketball team. Michael Jordan may have more of the points, but he doesn't do all the other things.
So Roberta, what does cooperation look like between you?
Well,
And Jim.
discussion is very helpful with the communication, which is a big word. Lots of C words here: commitment, communication. And, it's a give and take. And then you have to discuss sometimes how you're going to do something and when you're going to do it.
So you really sit down and have a true conversation about things.
Yeah, it has to be communication between the two of you.
And you make compromises together.
Sure, and sometimes it leans more their way, but I've never thought about keeping a chart or anything like that.
Well,
It's not.
Leslie said something earlier about keeping score. Explain a little bit about keeping score, because I know it happens. I hear it an awful lot. What does that mean?
Well, I think it's a little bit of, realizing that there's some things that, the husband always do or does, or the wife always does, and maybe that's because she or he prefers that. And my husband, over the years, he's becomes the one who cooks more, and, I pay the bills, but he does the taxes. And, we've shifted around on things, but there was a time when I was more conscious of keeping score when our children were very little, and I felt that I was doing more, and he didn't see it that way at all. And we never, ever could come to terms on that, and that was, so, I don't know how to quantify that. I just know it's a mistake. And I think, maybe this is the way we handle it. I think that one of the reasons our marriage works well is that we always thank each other for the contribution that the other is making.
Ooh.
I always say, thank you for dinner, sweetheart. And he'll say, thank you for, I don't say it enough, but thank you for all the things that you do. And it's kind of sort of an overlay of all the
Exactly.
things. So and it's not every day necessarily, but just that mindset of being appreciative of what your partner is doing.
I do the same thing.
Rather than looking for the deficits. I mean, so sure, sometimes, he tends to be more messy. I'm more of the Felix in the group. But, even there over time, it's the don't sweat the small stuff. I mean, how important is it that, everything be put away tidily in a drawer? I mean, this is where, when you look at the big picture of a marriage, who is this person?
Right.
I trust him implicitly. He's got a tremendous character and warmth and regard for his fellow man. I mean, he's a tremendous person. And that's what's important. So if I find myself being irritated about the fact that he runs, a few minutes late on a regular basis, sorry, honey, and leaves, piles of papers around stuff. I mean, it's just, you can get so hung up in something that is of no consequence.
Yeah, I don't think we can
That is so true.
overestimate the power of acknowledgement. The research shows, in fact, that people like and treasure the acknowledgements even more than expressions of love.
What do you
It's
do
so
to
important.
appreciate? How do you show
Oh, I
appreciation?
say thank you much more than he says thank you, actually. But it's important, and I do appreciate the things that he does
Yeah.
And I think
for us and for me as as an individual.
And I think appreciation is really key to having, these bonding relationships with people.
Absolutely.
But I think letting them know is
once you
important.
feel appreciated, I mean, that it just goes such a long way. It's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that even if you are doing more, if you're acknowledged for it and appreciated for it, then you don't build up the resentment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I, one of the things you were talking about is priorities, in your relationship, seeing the big picture rather than all the little, although, I don't know how you get around all those irritating clothes all over
You
the
just
floor.
have to
and
let 'em go.
The towels in the
No,
bathroom.
It has come with age. I mean, it used to bug me
mellowing.
more.
Yeah.
And especially when I first had the first baby came along. But, that's then partly looking to taking responsibility for yourself and your own issues. I mean, get over it if the kitchen's not perfect.
Perfect.
I mean, it's once the first baby comes, I mean, that standard, I have relaxed my own standards, and so I'm happier. So I think that's another key in a good marriage is taking responsibility for yourself. It's not up to them to make you happy. So if you have that from within yourself, you're much more forgiving of the little things that are of no consequence anyway, and it just overflows into how they respond to you, and it's the mirroring.
And the other
effect.
thing is to take whatever that irritation is on as a team. We did that with Peter's socks on the floor. And we went out and found a laundry basket that was like a basketball hoop. So it became a game to get the socks in the laundry basket.
There you go.
And they were
What
much
a
more likely to
solution.
get in there that way. So
Or
you take it on as a team.
Humor works too. I mean, Dennis still loves the socks on the floor, but I found this perfect Valentine's card once, and it had, the dirty socks and underwear, and they were heaped on the floor, but they were in the shape of a heart. It may be a little heap, but it was in a heart. So I bring that when I see the socks
was
and stuff.
definitely good humor.
Again, it's a get over it kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just not that important.
Yeah.
I want to remind everybody who our panelists have been today. To my right, married 27 years, is Mary Cunningham, Student Advisor of GRASP. To her right, married 46 years, is Roberta Cook, Swimming Instructor for Charlottesville Parks and Recreation. To her right, married 23 years, is Lesley Foster, owner of Ink and Inquiry. And to her right, married 37 years, is Phyllis Koch-Sheras, Clinical Psychologist at couplepower.com. We have a few minutes left, ladies, to just kind of sum up any kind of summary, important characteristics, whatever it is that you'd like to let our audience know about. Mary, let's start with you. You have about 30 seconds.
That big picture thing is very important, really keeping sight of that. But also giving each other space as well. That's important to me. It's important that I have that, and I think that to just acknowledge that for each other, let you be alone sometimes and have that separation.
And that
as
it's
well.
okay.
Separation in your togetherness.
There you go.
And love comes out in many different ways, and I think we haven't used that word quite enough.
Go ahead.
But, love for each other and respecting them and letting them do what they like to do, and they let you do what you like to do, and yet you have a time where you are doing things together.
Yeah.
Without feeling threatened is the key to all of this.
True.
It's kind of the underlying motive between what the two of you
Yeah,
said.
having confidence
Yes.
in the relationship.
Leslie?
Well, my parents got divorced when I was 6, and my father said to me, he used to say quite often, he passed away now, but that when he looked at my marriage with Dennis, he said, I think the reason it works for you two, you're both on the same page. And what he meant by it was the things that we valued, our orientation towards life, what we really wanted out of life, that we were simpatico. So again, it comes down to the big picture. Then what we value and what we want coincides.
Phyllis?
Well, I want to go back to acknowledgement, and I want to end by acknowledging everyone here for being
You
here
took my line.
and sharing what your couple is about and providing a positive model for other couples, because not many people are willing to do that and to share that, and it makes such a difference to have these models put out there. In our book, Lifelong Love, we talk about it as couple as source, that we can be, as powerful couples, a source for so much love and relatedness and connectedness in the world. So I acknowledge us all for being able to do that.
And having
And
known
for you to
you, well,
put that
having known you
together.
ladies, you know that, you're my inspiration, in terms of modeling and watching you over time, and I really appreciate that as well. So thank you, Phyllis, for doing that. You have been watching What Wize Women Want here on Charlottesville's public access Comcast Channel 13. If you'd like more information about our panelists, you can go to our website at www.whatwizewomenwant.com. Remember, Wize is spelled with a Z. And we hope to have you join us again next week. And we will be having more topics that we hope you will be interested in. Thank you very much for being with us, and please join us again, and we hope you enjoyed our program today.